She married better than she deserved. My sister actually said that, out loud, at my own engagement party. She was laughing when she said it, like it was the kind of joke everyone was already thinking, and she was just brave enough to say it first. My mom tilted her head and smiled that tight little smile she saves for things she secretly agrees with. My fiancé was standing 6 feet away talking to his uncle, and I watched his back go still for just a second, that small, imperceptible freeze that tells you someone has heard something they were never supposed to hear. Hi, my name is Fiona Marsh. I'm 29. I'm the younger one, the one who, according to my family, stumbled into good things she didn't quite earn. Let me tell you how that night ended, and then let me tell you why it happened at all. My sister Tara is 4 years older than me. She's the kind of person who makes everything look like a competition she already won. Growing up, she was the one with the grades, the clubs, the carefully documented achievements. My mom kept a folder for her, actual paper folder, in the kitchen drawer, where she tucked Tara's honor roll certificates and newspaper clippings from the school volleyball team. There was no folder for me. I didn't ask for one. I figured I'd make my own version of success, and it just wouldn't look like hers. I wasn't wrong, it turns out, but for a long time, I didn't know that yet. After college, Tara went into pharmaceutical sales. Good money, company car, constant travel. She talked about her job the way people talk about a personality. Every family dinner came with a commission update. Every holiday brought a new territory, a new quota crushed, a new ranking she'd climbed. My mom listened to every word like it was scripture. I had taken a different path. I spent 2 years after graduation doing something I couldn't really explain at dinner tables. I worked for a small private research firm that consulted for federal regulatory agencies. We assessed financial compliance. We reviewed institutional structures. The work was quiet, specific, and subject to agreements that meant I signed papers about the papers. Telling people what I did for work meant either lying or saying very little, so I usually said I worked in consulting and let the conversation move on. Tara filled the silence this created. She always had. At Christmas, she'd make small jokes about me, still figuring it out. At Easter, she'd ask if I was seeing anyone serious, with the specific inflection that implied she doubted it. My mom would nod or laugh softly, not correcting her, which I had learned long ago to read as agreement. My dad was quieter about it, but he deferred to Tara in ways that felt like endorsement. I met my fiancé, Christopher, at work. He was brought in for a short-term engagement on a project I was already 3 years into. He was smart and careful and patient in a way I'd never seen someone be patient before. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He knew what I did. He knew why I couldn't say much about it. He didn't need me to explain myself. That, more than anything, was how I knew. When we got engaged, I told my family at a Sunday dinner. Tara smiled and said, "Oh, Christopher, like from your work?" She made it sound like she was placing him in a category she hadn't quite decided on yet. My mom asked if he was established. My dad asked where he went to school. They met him a month later and adjusted their skepticism slightly. Christopher is calm and presentable and speaks in a way that reads as confident without being loud. Tara revised her opinion somewhere around the cheese course, and by the end of the evening was addressing most of her remarks to him directly, as though I had brought a better guest. The engagement party was my future mother-in-law's idea. She's a generous woman with a large house in Connecticut and a genuine enthusiasm for feeding people, and she offered to host something for both families before we started talking about weddings. Christopher and I said yes because she meant well and because we thought it would be fine. I should have known better. Fine is not a setting my sister has access to. The party was on a Saturday in late October. The house was warm, and there were appetizers and people I'd never met who were Christopher's relatives, and people I'd known my whole life who were mine. It should have been pleasant. It mostly was, for about an hour and 45 minutes. Then Tara had her third glass of wine. I was in the kitchen refilling a water glass when I heard her from the living room. She was talking to one of Christopher's aunts, a woman named Barbara who had silver hair and excellent posture, and who, I would later learn, had spent 30 years as a federal judge before retiring. Fiona was always the one we worried about, Tara was saying in the warm confessional tone people use when they want to sound honest. She kind of drifted after college. We never really knew what she was doing. A small pause. Honestly, she married better than she deserved. I heard Barbara say nothing. I heard Tara laugh like she'd offered a toast. I sit in the kitchen with my water glass, and I took one very slow breath. I could feel my own heartbeat. My hands were steady, which surprised me, because the inside of my chest felt like a room where the temperature had just dropped 10 degrees. I walked back into the living room. Not immediately. I took a moment. I set the water glass down on the counter. I smoothed the front of my dress. And then I walked back in. Barbara was still standing near Tara, but she had turned slightly the way someone turns when they are deciding whether to leave a conversation or wait. She saw me come in. Something in her expression shifted, not pity, recognition. Tara was already moving on to something else. She had the fluid obliviousness of someone who says things like that and then genuinely forgets. My mom was nearby talking to my aunt, and I noticed the slight angle of her body, turned just enough away that she could plausibly not have heard, while still being close enough that she probably had. Christopher found me about 10 minutes later by the fireplace. He handed me a glass of wine and stood close enough that his arm was against mine. "Are you okay?" he said quietly. I heard what she said. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. So did Barbara. I looked at him, and Barbara is going to be interesting in a few minutes, he said. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I watched Barbara cross the room toward Tara, and something in the deliberateness of the way she moved made the back of my neck go warm. I should tell you something about Christopher's family before I tell you what happened next. Christopher's father spent his career in federal oversight. His mother was, until recently, on the board of a regional health system. His Aunt Barbara, the woman with the silver hair and the excellent posture, had indeed been a federal judge for 3 decades, and before that she had worked as a senior advisor to 2 different committees in the Senate. Barbara also, as it happened, had been on the advisory board of the firm where I worked for the last 5 years. She had seen my reports. She knew my clearance level. She had read and documents that would never be publicly associated with my name, analysis that had informed regulatory decisions affecting industries worth more than I could say out loud at a party. She knew exactly who I was. She had simply been too polite to mention it, until Tara gave her a reason. I watched Barbara stop beside Tara with the ease of someone who has no reason to be nervous in any room. Tara turned to her with the bright social smile she puts on for people she's just decided matter. "I have to ask," Barbara said pleasantly, "did you say Fiona married better than she deserved?" Tara blinked. "Oh, it was just a joke. You know little sister stuff." She laughed, inviting Barbara to laugh with her. Barbara did not laugh. "I only ask," Barbara said, "because I've worked with Fiona for the better part of 5 years. She paused, the way someone pauses who has learned that silence is its own kind of weight. "She's one of the most rigorous analysts I've encountered in 40 years of federal advisory work. The phrase I'd use is that Christopher is marrying exceptionally well." The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, the way sound drops when something has happened that people need to process before they react. I watched Tara's smile stay on her face for 3 full seconds before her brain caught up with what had been said. My mom had turned fully around. My dad put his drink down. Tara said, She works in consulting." "She does," Barbara said, "among other things she can't tell you about." The last part landed like something dropped on a tile floor. Clean, loud, impossible to pretend hadn't happened. I walked toward them then, because the floor was mine and I had spent too long standing to the side of it. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't triumph exactly, it was something more complicated and quieter. The specific feeling of watching something true finally take up the space it had always been owed. "Barbara," I said when I reached them, "thank you." She gave me a small nod and stepped back, the way good people do when they've said what needs to be said and are content to let the room do the rest. I looked at Tara. Her glass was still in her hand. She had the look of someone who has said something in what they thought was a private corner and turned around to find the walls were glass. "For Nona," she started, "I didn't mean it like." "I know," I said. That stopped her. She'd expected defensiveness. She'd expected me to make it easier for her by getting upset first. "I know what you meant," I said. You meant it the way you've meant everything you've said about me for the last 10 years? You didn't think it would cost you anything. My mom took a small step toward me. Fiona, sweetheart, this isn't the place. You smiled, I said, not loud, steady. When she said it, I didn't see you from the kitchen, but I know you did. My mom said my name again, softer, like she was hoping the softness would be enough. I'm not making a scene, I said. I just want to say one thing clearly so we don't spend the next 20 years pretending I didn't hear what I heard. I looked at Tara. I have never once in my adult life asked you to take me seriously. I never corrected you at dinner. I never argued about your assumptions. I let you be the one with the folder and the sales rankings and the spotlight because I genuinely did not need it. I paused. The problem is you decided my silence meant you were right. Tara's jaw moved without producing words. I'm happy, I said. I'm good at my work, and I married someone I love who loves me back. That's not luck, and it's not less than what you have. I took a breath. But the next time you want to joke about what I deserve in front of his family, I need you to decide if it's worth it. Christopher was beside me then. I hadn't heard him come over. He put his hand on the small of my back, not pulling me away, just there, present. My mom was very still. My dad cleared his throat and said quietly, I think we could all use some air. It was the most useful thing he'd said all evening, and people began to move, and the room slowly unpulled itself from the tension. Barbara touched my arm as she passed me. Well done, she said in the same quiet register you'd use to evaluate a particularly clean piece of analysis. The rest of the party was different after that. Not ruined. Christopher's family was gracious and warm and pretended well, which is a skill I've come to appreciate. But different. People talked to me differently. His cousins asked me questions they hadn't asked before. His mother hugged me longer than she had when we arrived. Tara spent the rest of the evening talking to my dad near the coat track, speaking in a lower register than she'd used all night. My mom found me near the end of the evening, when most people were getting their coats. She stood beside me and looked at the room for a moment before she spoke. I didn't know, she said. I know, I said. That's what I've been trying to tell you. The NDA. It's not just the NDA, Mom. I kept my voice even. It's that you never asked. In 10 years of dinners, you never once said, what is it you actually do? What is it like? Are you okay? You asked Tara those things. You updated the folder for Tara. For me, you just waited for something to prove you right about. She was quiet for a long time. When she looked at me, her eyes were bright. I should have asked, she said. That was the closest she came to an apology that night. It wasn't enough, and we both knew it, and we also both knew it was a start. In the car on the way home, Christopher drove and I looked out the window at the Connecticut dark, the lit windows of houses going past, all those people inside living their quiet lives. You didn't have to wait for Barbara to say something, he said. I know, I said, but it was good timing. He smiled. She called you the most rigorous analyst she's worked with in 40 years. She's generous. She's precise, he said. Barbara does not do generous. I laughed, and the laugh came out a little ragged at the edges, the way they do when you've been holding something tightly for a long time and have only just put it down. The weeks after were quieter. Tara texted me twice, once the day after the party, something brief and not quite an apology, more of an acknowledgement that things had gotten heavy. The second time was 2 weeks later, longer, more honest. She said she'd been thinking about it. She said she didn't realize how much she'd been talking about me like a placeholder instead of a person. She said she was sorry. I read it twice and then put my phone down and made coffee and stood at my kitchen window for a while before I responded. I told her I accepted the apology. I told her I wasn't going to pretend 10 years hadn't happened, but I wasn't going to hold them against her forever either. I told her what I actually wanted was for her to be curious about my life instead of summarizing it. She said she could do that. I don't know yet if she can, but I'm willing to find out. My mom called on a Sunday a few weeks later. We talked for almost an hour. She asked me, for the first time in memory, what my work actually felt like. I told her what I could. She listened in a way she hadn't before, filling in the silence with questions instead of assumptions. It was strange and slightly uncomfortable and better than anything we'd had in years. At the bridal shower, my mom sat next to Barbara and they talked for 2 hours about regulatory policy and public health infrastructure, and my mom came home and told my dad she'd had the most interesting conversation of the year. My dad looked faintly bewildered. I found out from Christopher that Barbara had described me to my mom as the kind of person who changes systems without needing to be in the room. My mom texted me later that night, just one line. "I'm proud of you." I should have said that a long time ago. I sat with my phone in my hands for a moment. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for such a long time I'd stopped noticing it. The wedding was in April, small, outside, the kind of day that makes you grateful for the season. Tara stood beside me as my maid of honor and gave a toast that was warm and honest and didn't include any jokes at my expense. She cried a little at the end. I think she meant it. Christopher and I drove away from the reception in the early evening with the windows down, and he reached over and took my hand on the center console, and we didn't say anything for a while because we didn't need to. The secret of being silent for a long time is that people decide what your silence means. They fill it with whatever the story is they've already decided to tell about you. The only way to change the story is to eventually let the truth be louder than the narrative they built around you, and that doesn't happen all at once. It happens the way most real things happen, quietly, specifically in the middle of an ordinary evening, when the right person says the right thing in a room that didn't expect it. I didn't need my family to know who I was, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter, finally, that they do. I kept thinking about that moment in the kitchen, me standing there with a water glass, hearing my sister's voice carry across the room like she had nothing to lose by saying it. And maybe she thought she didn't. That's the part that stayed with me longest. Not the words, but the casualness of them. The way cruelty becomes habit when no one ever pushes back. Here's what I've come to understand about the way things unfolded that night. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't plan a takedown. I just spent years building something real, while the people around me filled in my silence with a story that was easier for them than the truth. And what happened at that party wasn't revenge. It was just reality finally catching up to the narrative they'd constructed without my input. There's something I've been turning over ever since, and it has to do with the choices I made when I was younger that I didn't fully understand I was making. I could have corrected my family at every dinner. I could have announced my work, defended my choices, argued for my own credibility. Some part of me chose not to. And for a long time I told myself it was because it wasn't worth the fight. But the real reason was simpler. I knew what I was building. I didn't need their version of me to be wrong in order to know that mine was right. That kind of steadiness, the ability to keep working, keep growing, keep showing up for something you believe in even when no one around you sees it yet, that's not stubbornness. It's the quietest and most necessary form of strength there is. What Barbara said that night wasn't something I asked her to say, but it mattered that she said it, and I've thought about why. It's because integrity shows up in rooms you didn't know you were in. The work I did, the way I did it, the standards I held myself to even when no one was watching, all of that traveled before I did. You don't get to control who sees your record. You only get to control what the record actually says. Tara had been narrating my life for a decade, but she'd never bothered to read it. The gap between those two things is where that evening lived. My sister is trying now, I believe that, and I've been thinking about what it takes to actually change. Not to apologize once and move on, but to look at the assumptions you've carried for years and be willing to find them wrong. That takes something most people don't develop until something forces them to. It takes honesty with yourself that is more uncomfortable than any argument you could have with someone else. I hope she gets there. I think she might. As for my mom, that text she sent the night of the bridal shower is still on my phone. I've read it more times than I'll admit. Not because I needed her approval to feel good about my life, but because it reminded me that people can surprise you, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is leave enough room for that to happen. I spent a long time being the quiet one. I don't regret it. Silence, when it comes from a place of certainty rather than fear, is its own kind of statement. And the truth, it turns out, is remarkably patient. It doesn't need you to argue for it. It just needs you to keep living it until there's no other version left to believe.